What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going over one of the most important upgrades for your Surron or Talaria, and that is the brakes. We got to stay safe while riding, we got to be able to stop. So we're going to be talking about upgraded brake pads for the stock brakes, upgraded rotors for the stock brakes, different sizes, and talking about different thicknesses and how that affects braking. And then we're going to be talking about full upgraded brake sets for both of these bikes. We've tried some of the best on the market, and we're going to talk about what we think is best for you as a rider, and we're going to pair that to the best set of rotors that we have found so far. We hope that you find this video helpful and informative. Don't forget to subscribe, and let's get into it. To start off the video, we're going to try to share as much knowledge as we can and experience with all these brakes. However, we're not experts and there is a lot to go over. We'll do our best. I come from working at a bike shop, and most of these brakes are mountain bike brakes. And I have a ton of experience trying nearly every bicycle, like mountain bike brake on the market. I've had experience bleeding them, riding them, racing with them, replacing pads. And so I do have a lot of experience, although I'm not an expert in all the categories. But we're gonna start by talking with the less expensive upgrades that you can do for your stock brakes, move on to the more expensive options and a full brake upgrade such as these TRP DHR Evos right here. So let's go back to the Talaria. This is a stock Talaria Sting R. It has upgraded brakes from the MX3 model and brakes that we feel are superior to the Surron Lightbee X. They come with two 20mm rotors in the front and back, which is a great upgrade from the other models. They are also a 2.3mm thick rotor, which is a very thick rotor, and it adds strength and added cooling because it has more mass. Now, the first upgrade that you can do to this bike is going to be upgraded brake pads. My opinion to you is right when you buy the bike, it is not worth it to immediately upgrade your brake pads. I don't think it is worth the extra money to get a slight increase in performance, braking power, and lever feel. However, once your brake pads are wore out, I do think it is worth a little bit of extra money to get some high performance brake pads, install them on your bike, and I think you will see a difference. Just to re-emphasize what I'm saying here, I don't think it is worth it to upgrade your brake pads right when you take your Sting R out of the box. I think that you can bed these brakes in and that they can work really well for you. And then once they're wore out, I think it is well worth spending the extra money to get some upgraded pads. Usually they're in the ballpark of $70 to $80 to get two sets of high performance brake pads for these brakes. We've tried them. There is a little bit of an increase, but again, I do not think it is worth it right out of the box. And despite what all the Facebook forums say that you have to upgrade immediately, you don't. The brakes are actually pretty dang good on this bike. This brake pad talk also applies to the Talaria XXX, the Surron Lightbee, the Talaria MX3, all these other models that have very similar brakes. Now let's talk about some brake rotors. So there is a lot of different brake rotors out on the market. There is fewer available for the rear of the Talaria because it is a different rotor bolt pattern than the Surron or than upgraded wheels such as Warp 9 wheels, which are a very popular wheel set to upgrade to. So the differences in brake rotors, you've got size, right? You'll see anywhere from 200mm, 220mm, and even up to 250mm, which we'll show you in a second on Reed's bike. You also have different rotor thicknesses, which is essentially how much rotor the pads have to grab onto. So the stock Talaria Sting R rotors are 2.3mm thick, which is a fairly thick rotor. The sizes range anywhere from about 1.8mm to 2.3 or 2.4mm thick. Now, what the benefits you get from a thicker rotor is actually more mass, which actually helps with cooling because it's more basically surface area and weight to dissipate heat. And the thicker rotor is just essentially stronger because it has more material and is going to flex less under hard braking and extreme heat. So let me show you on this bike. So these are the Warp 9 upgraded two-piece rotors. So these are a 1.85mm thick rotor, which is a very thin rotor. However, these are a high performance rotor and they still work very well with the right type of brakes. These are Hayes Dominion A4 brakes. We'll talk about this more later in the video, but these brakes were specifically designed for between a 1.8 and a 1.9 mm thick rotor, and so they work perfectly paired with these Warp 9 rotors. However, if you pair this brake with a 2.3 millimeter thick rotor, which I've done, they do brake well, but they are almost impossible to keep from rubbing because there is just not enough room between the pads to fit a thicker rotor. They're just not designed to work with a thick rotor. So that's something you have to keep in mind when you are deciding what brakes to upgrade to and also what brake rotors you're gonna pair with those brakes. The Surron X and the Talaria MX3 both come with 200 millimeter rotors, and they are between 2 millimeters and 2.1 millimeters is what we have measured. So they're slightly thinner than the Talaria R, and they're slightly thicker than like the 1.8, 1.85 rotors that you will also see. So with all this info, we'll try to sum it up as best we can at the end of the video so it makes sense to you, so you know exactly what will work best for you. And we're also gonna be putting as many links down in the video description as possible for all these different parts. Let's keep talking about these rotors. So right here I have a 200 mil rotor. Here we have a 220 mil rotor. And right here we have a 250 mil rotor. Those are the most common sizes that you will see on a Talaria and a Surron. 250 mil is less common, but you'll see 200 and 220 all the time. We'll talk about some differences here. We have a floating rotor design here, and we have your traditional one-piece rotor here. Now, typically a two-piece floating is going to be a higher end rotor because it is designed with two different materials that will allow for better cooling and added strength, which helps keep the rotor from warping under those high brake loads and especially when it's extremely hot. So that's the benefit of a floating rotor. This rotor typically warps easier than a floating, but you can still get pretty high-end rotors in a single piece design. So you'll hear people talk about how bigger rotors are better. Let me explain why. So a 200 mil rotor, 220, huge 250, essentially you have more leverage because you are further away from the hub, and so when your brake clamps down you have more leverage to stop your wheel from spinning. Now that helps stop your wheel from spinning. A huge rotor also helps keep it cool because there's more mass and there's more metal that can dissipate that heat when your rotor is extremely hot. Now the one downside to a 250 is it is kind of in the way if you're going over huge rocks or roots. Like there currently isn't a rotor guard design like this that will fit and actually protect a 250 mil rotor. So that's the one downside. This is the 250 mil Ripon Moto two-piece rotor. This is their highest end rotor. They also have a single piece rotor similar to this in the 250 size. We tried that as well and it warped almost immediately because it just wasn't strong enough. Again, that size is so big that it has so much leverage, but if it's not a super beefy reinforced rotor, it will warp. So we do not recommend their standard rotor. However, this two-piece rotor is the best rotor we've tried by far. Reed has been pushing these rotors for several hundred miles and he has been deliberately trying to warp them and it hasn't happened yet. I'm talking we're going down crazy descents where we are smelling Alex's brakes. He's cooking his brakes. I have these upgraded TRPs which kept me a little bit cooler. Reed's brakes were like cold compared to ours. So they have added power. He's noticed a huge increase in performance with them because of the leverage, and they're staying cooler and they are not warping. Now these are a 2.3 mil thick rotor, so they will work with specific brakes, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on when we go over actual brake upgrades. The last downside to these Ripon Moto rotors is the price. They are a very premium product and they work extremely well. So if you want the best, then they are worth it. But to get a front and rear 250 mil floating rotor plus the brackets that you need to mount them, which you need them to mount them because they're a different size than anybody else makes, you're looking at $280 for front and back combined. So that is significantly more expensive than most other brake rotors, but it just comes down to it. If you want the best performance, you're going to pay the most high price. If we move down to the 220 mil size, this is going to be the most common upgraded size from 200 and actually still adds a huge amount of leverage difference, and you will notice an increase in performance with 220 versus 200. You can also get floating rotor designs similar to this in a 220 size, and that will also increase performance. It'll help it cool better, just like we've been talking about. A higher end 220 rotor is going to perform better than a lower end 220 mil rotor as well. Before we move on and talk about the actual upgraded brake sets that you can put on these bikes, we're going to talk about the couple of tiers that you can do and sort of simplify this process for you. So your first upgrade tier, like we talked about, is brake pads. Anywhere from $50 to $80 is going to get you a upgraded set of brake pads. There's lots of different brands out there. We'll put several links in the description to the ones that we've tried and feel are the best bang for your buck. Your next tier is going to be upgraded rotors. Maybe you have a Surron or a Talaria MX3 with only 200 mil rotors. You could upgrade to some 220s. Maybe you go the floating design route, which will help with cooling. Those are going to run you anywhere from 100 to 180 roughly for a set front and back, plus some spacers to make your brake calipers still work on those rotors. I think this is an upgrade, although it's not a huge upgrade. So this might be worth doing if you are planning on maybe spending the money on some upgraded brakes in the future. So kind of keep that in mind. The other thing you can do to this upgrade is add some brake pads on top of that. So then you're kind of in a little bit higher tier, but you will notice a performance increase there. Your next tier is going to be to upgrade to the Moto 250 mil two-piece floating rotor that we just talked about. These rotors, we have been putting them to the absolute test, just beating on them to death, and they are holding up extremely well. Those rotors are expensive though, so they're going to run you $280 with the caliper mounts to make them fit on your bike. You can also add brake pads on top of that for an even more premium feel, and this will be a huge difference from stock. Now, the next tier we're going to get into more detail on, but that is going to be a full-on brake set upgrade, which if you're going to do it right is going to run you anywhere from $500 to $600 for brakes front and back. And then if you guys really want to go big, you're going to pair that with the Moto 250 mil rotors. So if you guys really want to do it right, you are almost $1,000 to get the most premium braking performance that you can get on these bikes. But it is a massive difference, and let's go into the different models that we recommend as far as upgraded brakes. We're going to talk most in depth on two brake sets that we have the most experience on. That is the TRP DHR Evo brake, and then the Hayes Dominion A4, which is on this Surron that we'll show you in a second. Now, these are the brakes we've spent the most time on a Surron and Talaria. However, I have owned and ridden lots of Magura models. I've ridden the Shimano XT 4-piston trail brakes, the XTR brakes. I've ridden SRAM Code and Guide brakes, the highest tier of those models. I've ridden most brakes that you can think of on the market. And the Hayes Dominion and the TRP are some of the highest end brakes, and they work flawlessly, but they have some differences. Okay, we'll talk about TRP first. So the TRP, one of my favorite things is that they are designed to work with a 2.3 millimeter thick rotor. And I've been testing that. I've been actually running them with the stock Talaria Sting R 220 mil rotors, and they're working really well. I haven't had any issues with brake rub because the rotors are designed to work with this thickness. Now, TRP sells a 220 mil rotor very similar to the stock Sting R rotor, and I think they are a little bit higher quality. But if you already have a Sting R, these brake rotors are working great with these brakes. They have excellent modulation, and they have excellent lever adjustment. Right here you can adjust your lever out and in. These brakes use mineral fluid and have a pretty simple bleeding procedure. So we'll walk over to Surron here. So the Hayes Dominions, I've spent a considerable amount of time, like almost a month straight of running these Dominion brakes. They also have great lever adjustment. They even have some extra pad adjustment here where you can use these two set screws to actually help you align the brake perfectly on the rotor so that it doesn't rub. There's a couple added benefits to these brakes which are super nice. They are designed, however, to work with a 1.8 to 1.9 millimeter thick rotor. So that's why we've paired them with this Warp 9 upgraded floating 220 rotor, is because it's that 1.85 millimeters thick, and they're working excellently with this rotor. So again, that goes back to, depending on what brakes you want to upgrade to, you need to look up what actual rotors the manufacturer recommends for those brakes and look up how thick they are. You don't necessarily have to run the manufacturer's rotor, but I assure you, you want to get the right thickness for your brake and they will work much better than they would otherwise. With the Hayes Dominion brakes, because they are designed to work with a 1.85 millimeter thick rotor, they really do not work with the stock 220 mil rotors or even the 200 mil rotors that come on the MX3. They are really designed for a thin rotor. They work best with it. We've tried it on the stock Sting R rotors and the brake pads wore out extremely quickly because they were pretty much rubbing the entire time because there just wasn't enough room in there with that thick rotor, if that makes sense. These brakes have a little bit different lever feel. They have a softer feel, and with that adjustment, it's nice. These are both of these are a true one finger brake, and they just have a little bit different feel, and it almost comes down to personal preference which one is better. I think my pick is the TRP DHR Evos because I like that thick rotor. I like the added strength and cooling that that rotor has, and it makes it so they do warp less. Now, I've been running these for a while, and eventually I'm gonna be upgrading to the Rip & Moto 250 mil rotors, and I'm gonna try out that upper top tier echelon on braking performance that you can get out of a mountain bike brake. We haven't really talked about actual moto brakes. There are some moto brake conversions for these bikes. I know Grit Shift is coming out with one for the rear, and there's already some stuff you can do with the front by fitting actual moto suspension on the front. Those brakes are bigger and beefier than these, but these brakes are a huge upgrade from stock, and I think you guys would be super happy upgrading to them. So we've talked in depth about the TRP DHR Evo brake and the Hayes Dominion A4 brake. Those are the ones that we've spent the most time on the Talaria and the Surron. There are some other upgraded brake options, such as the Shimano 4-piston brakes, the XT Trail, the Shimano XTR, and even the Saint downhill brake from Shimano. There's also the SRAM Code and G2 brakes. Those are all excellent brakes, but in our opinion, you're gonna pay the same money for those, and we prefer the TRPs or the Hayes, depending on which brake you want, over those other models. I've owned those other models, I've tried those other models. I think these are better. I would also pick the TRPs over a Magura brake. They have a solid brake, but the TRPs are better for very similar money. The TRPs are also e-bike rated, which is super awesome to know. That means that they'll support this brake even when it's on a heavy e-bike like this, and they are extremely powerful. Huge thank you to Rip & Moto for sending out their oversized 250 mil rotors. There will be a link down in the description below. Those are amazing rotors. Huge shout out to Charge Cycle Works for hooking us up with the TRP DHR Evo brakes. They are a fantastic brake, and we'll leave a link down below to their site as well. They come in black, silver, and even gold, so you can color match them pretty well to a lot of different bikes. Huge shout out also to eBikeZilla for hooking us up on those Hayes Dominion A4 brakes. They've been a fantastic brake paired with those Warp 9 rotors, so you guys will have to go check those out. Link in the description. They come in a cool silver color or a bronze color. We really appreciate you guys watching. This has been a hard video to make. It's really a lot to talk about, a lot to kind of try to make sense, but the real bullet points are: see how much money you are willing to spend on upgraded brakes, decide if you want to go the brake pads route, the brake rotors route, or if you really want to spend the big money and get yourself a full upgraded brake set and even some Rip & Moto rotors, and you guys will be extremely happy. We really appreciate you guys watching, and I know that we did not do any like official brake stop tests or things like that, but a lot of that is just going to be very similar between all these upgraded brakes and parts, the way it looks on camera. Really what it comes down to is feel. We've ridden them, we've tested them, we've worked on them, and these are our opinions on what we feel is best. I'm sure many of you will have lots of questions or comments. Please leave them down below and we'll be answering as many as we can. We have a lot of knowledge about all these specific mountain bike type brakes, and we're happy to help out. We really appreciate you guys watching. Thanks to eBikeZilla, Charge Cycle Works, and Rip & Moto for hooking us up and making this video possible. Thanks guys for watching. We'll catch you next video. See ya. Oh yeah, and if you found this video helpful, hit that subscribe button. See ya.